A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 51. I am your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host in the Force. No, John Llewellyn. Hey, John. I'm sorry.
Am I your co-host? I'm confused now.
Co-host in the Force.
I'm still your co-host, right?
No, I said co-host.
You're not firing. This isn't your way of firing me.
No, I said, you didn't hear the co-host in the Force?
I did. But then you said no, not really, so I didn't know if you were firing me.
No, I'm trying to be like more like a real Star Wars podcast, because I always feel like I'm
we need to make more Star Wars puns. Is that what you're telling me?
I don't know. And people say
yes,
that
I can.
No, well, you can do whatever you want. You're the co-host, John. You can if you want to put in the if you want to do Star Wars puns, that's fine. And my level's all right.
They should be.
Okay. All right. This is all this technical stuff that you get to hear the behind the scenes. No, I just thought, like, you know, people go, hey, brothers in the Force or sisters of the Force, and we don't really do that. And now I know why we don't. Because it's just not us.
It's not us.
We're the Star Wars podcast that is one of the Star Wars podcasts. But
yes.
I want to thank you.
If you would like to listen to a Star Wars podcast, this is certainly one of those.
I'm having a, what do they call it? Existential podcast crises. What's up?
Nothing. I don't think anything's really been happening Star Wars wise. Do you?
Nah.
It's really been a pretty slow week news wise, I would say. We're really going to have to stretch to fill our time this week.
Yes. And of course we all know that, nothing happened, so we can pretty just let's just talk about our favorite weapons from Star. No, anyway, obviously, anyone who is a follower of Star Wars knows that Celebration 16 Europe Europe. I don't know what they call it. What did they call
Star
it?
Wars Celebration Europe.
That's
the hashtag was hashtag SWCE. So Star Wars Celebration Europe, I guess. But it's also the only Star Wars Celebration happening this year, right? So it's technically just Star Wars Celebration.
Yeah.
And this year it just happened to be in London rather than Anaheim.
That is true. That is kind of like a weird distinction. I wonder if that maybe they're just
It's like if you go to some other conference, it's not like, you know, Plumbers Union Conference Europe, or, you know, they don't, or, you know, if it's in Cleveland one year and I don't know, Detroit the next year, they don't call it Plumbers Union Conference Detroit or Plumbers Union Conference Cleveland.
They might. You never know.
They might. I don't know. I don't know what Plumbers Union conferences are called. I had to pick something that wouldn't reveal what my job is and what conferences I actually go to. Even though you could probably figure that out if
you can't really. Yeah, you don't want people knowing about. You don't want our fans showing up at conferences bugging you about asking you Star Wars questions.
Please don't. That would be okay, I guess. I don't know. I'm never sure like how much of like pop culture-y stuff to talk about on my work Twitter account. Yes, I have a separate Twitter account for work. Right, because there are these other people who do what I do who are employed, they have jobs, whatever, and they'll talk about like the baseball game they're watching or Star Wars or, you know, Star Trek or different things. I'm like, yeah, I maybe once I'm hired, I'll do that. But I feel like I'm at the point in my career where people are like, if I do that too much, people will wonder like how I have all that free time to be watching basketball or thinking about Star Wars a lot or whatever. So I try to keep I try not to cross the stream. So is that for a Star Wars reference?
That's not a Star Wars reference.
I know.
But
it's a joke.
Yeah, but the truth is they will judge you. I mean, that's the thing. Because I know people that are like, I don't know how so-and-so has so much time to do X on Twitter. It's like, okay, wow. They are really keeping an eye out. But speaking of Twitter, John did a great job kind of keeping our followers abreast of all the exciting stuff, panels and reveals. And I mean, I don't know.
Well, at least the ones that I woke up in time for, because since it was in London, there's a time difference, and there was even one. Most of the panels that I thought would be interesting enough to do that for, I was already awake for anyway. There was one though where I specifically woke up at 6 a.m. just to like live tweet it, and it ended up being less interesting than I thought it would be.
Was it? Are you talking about Rogue One? Or are you talking?
No, it was the droids, creatures, and aliens of Star Wars or whatever, of the Force Awakens, I guess. I mean, it got interesting towards the end, but there was no real need for me to wake up at 6 a.m. And especially too, on YouTube, the official Star Wars YouTube channel eventually started like posting the separate panels there anyway, so I could have just watched it later.
Yeah, I mean, the only one I got up to watch was the which I assumed, and I was probably right, was the biggest one. It was the Rogue One panel at. Yeah,
I mean, you had it even tougher because you were even a couple hours behind me, so you really had to wake up early for that one.
No, what time was it? No, I think it was at 8 actually.
Okay.
The one thing is I'm a night owl, and so I was already up till 3:30. And then I went to bed, and then I woke up early, and then I was like, well, if I go back to bed now, I'll sleep right through my alarm. So I actually I watched it with 3 hours of sleep. So it kind of ruined me for the day. And like the whole next day I was just like, something, they're putting these up on video. I think I can watch them later. I am glad I got up for the Rogue One because they to the date, which is Wednesday, the 19th, 20th, Wednesday the 20th. They have yet to put up the panel on StarWars.com. You can actually
So the day one panels they put up separately, and even maybe a couple of the day two panels they put up separately, but then for day 3, they just put up the whole day, or not every panel, but all of the panels that got streamed live, is one 4 or 5 hour block. They just put that whole thing up. And so you had to go through and find the individual panel you were interested in between all of the people, Hasbro hawking their new toys, or, those people who make the commercial, drone toys hawking their new X-Wing drone or whatever.
Right.
So it's up there, but you have to search a little bit for it.
Well, the Rogue One, the full Rogue One isn't up there though.
It isn't?
No, I mean that was kind of the thing because we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. There was a kind of a spoiler, pretty big spoiler.
They could be hiding that, yeah.
And I think they're either wanting to maybe. I don't know. That panel, I mean, I guess we can jump right into it. I mean, that Rogue One panel, which was kind of the
highlight. I would say there are kind of two big panels, the Rogue One being the biggest, and then the Rebels.
Yeah.
Depends on how big you are into Rebels. But yeah, the Rogue One was definitely kind of the one that they were saying, this is the big newsworthy thing that, we want everyone to be talking about.
Right. And if you search for Rogue One panel, you can find it, like I said, you can find a half an hour cut down version, but the original one was kind of there's no other word I can think of at the top of my head. It's a kind of sloppy 1 hour panel. There was some kind of, it was kind of sloppy. I mean, I'm not really criticizing it because I know that when you're dealing with, these panels are very, well, it's it's a corporate panel. It's not they have to be very careful. They're still, we're still 5 months away from release.
Yeah. And this is something that is probably going to come up several times, at least from my end. But I mean, I think a thing to remember about especially the panels that StarWars.com was live streaming that they wanted a lot of people to see, but especially the Rogue One panel, right? This is a company trying to sell you on a thing, right? Whether that is a TV show, a movie, they're trying to advertise books for you to purchase, advertise toys for you to purchase, right? It's essentially advertising for Lucasfilm. And, as much as it kind of, maybe its origins were in like a fan convention, and as much as they talk up like, oh, it's so great to see all these fans here and connect with the fans, and, it's all about the fans, and, we want to, make sure that you guys are, on board with everything like this. It's advertising, like you're being advertised to.
Right.
And so, right, exactly. In terms of, so that, all the kind of principal actors in Rogue One came out and were asked to describe their character, with maybe two exceptions. One was planned, one unplanned, as we alluded to. Basically, everyone just repeated what was already in that Entertainment Weekly feature. Like, we didn't really learn anything new about who Jyn Erso is, or we didn't learn really anything new about who, Bodhi Rook is, or, Orson Krennic. It's just, oh, my character is a bit of a wild card, and it's fun to see how he interacts with everyone else in the group. Next, right? So that part of it, yeah, it's, I mean, I guess considering that's all it was, you would think it could be maybe a little more organized, but it's not something they rehearsed necessarily, but it is definitely, they had specific talking points, and even so this one, the Rogue One panel, was hosted by Gwendolyn Christie, but even the other panels that were hosted by Warwick Davis or David Collins, or I'm blanking on the woman's name who hosted some of the panels. They're there to like, I guess create a fun panel for fans, but at the same time, like, they had talking points, they had things they needed to hit. Essentially, they had marks they needed to hit to let whoever they were talking to kind of tell their anecdote about. It was like, oh, I hear, it was even worse in some ways than what you see on like a late night talk show, where, if it's Conan O'Brien or Stephen Colbert or whomever, I don't, they're probably the only ones who are, I guess Kimmel is good at this too, to some degree. They'll kind of like work their way into this anecdote, whereas like these, at celebrations, like, oh, so I hear you have a funny anecdote about something you did to Gareth Edwards' assistant, and like that's how they introduce the thing. And and in this case, it was Alan Tudyk, and it was supposed to like humanize him and be like a funny story he could tell. Or no, I guess it was Ben Mendelsohn. It was, oh, I hear you had a funny story about something that you did to Gareth Edwards' assistant. And it ended up like petering out because like that's not really how you introduce an anecdote. That's not how you set someone up to like tell a funny story. So that aspect of it, it ended up being kind of
it was a little
haphazard.
It was a little strange in the sense that I think that on a movie that was being sold as kind of an ensemble piece, that maybe there might have been I will say this, that Riz Ahmed kind of got in the spirit of it, I think. Mm-hmm. He's playing a guy playing Bodhi Rook. He kind of like was making fun of Alan Tudyk a little bit.
Yeah, there were a few moments where you got a sense that like, okay, these people enjoyed working together.
Yeah, it's like
they have jokes among themselves. Like, okay.
Yeah, it's kind of like the idea of like, I mean, I honestly think it may have been inspired from this kind of almost draconian Lucasfilm's idea of like, let's not give away too much information. Mm-hmm. Let's keep it light. Let's keep it anecdotal. Let's talk about how much we love Star Wars and how important it to us is. Mm-hmm. Let's not, because I mean, we've already had issues with like Mads Mikkelsen had already kind of let it go like 4 months ago that he was playing Jyn Erso's father in the film, and that he kind of hinted, I think, about the idea that he was involved in the creation of the Death Star's weapon or something like, or maybe that's something else. But he was very kind of staid and low key this time around. I think probably he had been talked to, and And everybody else's thing, which kind of left the when Zhen Wang, is it Zhen Wang? Is that my pronouncing correct?
Or Jiang Wen.
Jiang Wen, sorry. When his kind of disclosure, which I'm not gonna, just for the sake of having fun, I'm making it fun. I'm not gonna talk about it specifically. You can go and look it up. And to be honest, I don't consider it to be a major spoiler.
Yeah, I don't either.
Because some of it was like, well, is that what he meant to say? And it's confusing.
Yeah, that was his English is not. Yeah, I guess great. I was actually a little surprised. I thought his English was better than that. But he clearly was. There were times where he wasn't sure that he was saying the words that he meant to be saying. He was like, is that how you say this? Is it
right? I mean, when they called him out, I think even because I think his name is, when they say it, I think it's an Americanized version anyway. Because when they called his name, he didn't even come out.
Yeah,
it's like, maybe he's like, is that what they think my name is? Kind of attitude, but it's like,
yeah, he did have a little. Yeah,
it took a while for him to get out there, and it's like. And I kind of like that because, to be honest, it was the only thing that didn't feel kind of rehearsed or, very, for lack of a better.
Tell us your story about what you did to the assistant.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, Donnie Yen, he said
I hear you like roller coasters.
Donnie Yen said that kind of corny thing like, oh, he can't see, but he sees with his heart. And you're just
right. And I pointed this out on Twitter. I'm pretty sure that is. Oh no, it's not. It's not exactly a line from the Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon sequel that came out on Netflix. And he's in that movie. He's not in this scene, but it's super close. I really thought it was like a quote from that movie. I think the line in that movie is something like "hear with your mind" or something like that, and he was like "see with your heart." So it for a second, I was like, wait a minute, did he just use a line from that movie to explain his character in a different movie? Because that's bizarre. What is it? It was close, but I don't think it was exactly the line.
Yeah, it was kind of like, but I mean, like I said, he was, and people liked it. I mean, and it might be completely true about this character too. I mean, it's like I said, they're kind of locked down. I mean, we didn't hear a lot from Felicity Jones, which I was kind of surprised about. Mm-hmm. But I mean, obviously,
yeah, I mean, and especially you talked about this being more of an ensemble film, I guess. But if there is a main character, she's certainly it. And they, showed off her toy, which is now, now they just announced the Black Series. Jyn Erso is going to be exclusively at Comic-Con this weekend, at least for now. So yeah, they're definitely kind of putting her forward as the main character in this film, if there is one. But if that's the case, you're right. She got surprisingly little kind of time on the panel. I feel like Alan Tudyk ended up talking a lot more than anyone, maybe.
Yeah, we got to get.
Not sure why that is.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's the kind of the. I mean, he's like, what is he? He's
sort of like the comic relief.
Well, he crosses the streams. He's right. He was in Firefly and Serenity, and people, and he's obviously a old hat. This is old hat to him. He can go and
right at these kind of fan conventions.
Yeah, he's done this before, so he probably knows how to kind of get the crowd. Whereas, Forrest Whitaker was incredibly subdued. I mean, I don't think he's I don't think as a dude, I don't think he's.
He doesn't really strike me as high energy.
Yeah, he's not a high energy guy. I think he's like. And I'm obviously speaking a lot about a guy I don't know, but I think a lot of his energy is he puts it into the role. So when he's promoting, he's probably mentally I'm already kind of done with this kind of thing. He's very, I think one-on-one you get a different guy, but in a huge situation like that, I think he's he's not gonna flourish. Because I mean, he definitely, I've heard some interviews with him where he has a definite opinion and he talks about Saw Gerrera. And how how he'd watched the Clone Wars and how he got to tap into that character, which he doesn't really talk about, but just the idea of that, that fed into his performance a little bit, or vice versa. But yeah, no, he was very subdued. I mean, the big one was Ben Mendelsohn. He kind of stole the show. Yeah, which he kind of came out as came out as Krennic with his Dark Troopers, or what are they called?
Death
Death Troopers. I'm terrible.
Right. So last Celebration at the Force Awakens panel, they had the new stormtroopers come out, and like everyone was applauding and got their photos took all their photos and everything. And I think they were kind of trying to recapture some of that here, where it's like, here's your new villain. And so he like walked down the aisle with it was only 2 Death Troopers this time instead of the like dozen Stormtroopers or whatever. I don't know. At least for me watching at home, I don't think it probably played as well over the live stream as it did live.
Yeah, I mean, I think what it was...
I was like, oh, okay, neat. But we've seen that costume in that first teaser already. Like, we kind of knew what he looked like. It wasn't like a big surprise. That like, oh my god, that's what the new villain looks like.
Yeah, and then there was I think what they were trying to do is maybe recreate the Tom Hiddleston moment a couple years ago when I think it was the first Avengers, or maybe it was the second Thor, when he came out in costume and he... kind of just went and said all these things, and he was totally in character, and people just loved. They were just eating it up, and then he left. Mm-hmm. I think they were trying to get that, and they, I think because that nobody knows who this guy is, and he's tucked in this very strange time in the timeline where it's like, and also everybody knows that they're like, that the big thing was that Vader's coming back.
Right.
And I don't think they want to show that. I think they want to keep that till they get it on into theaters. So they've been very coy about that. So even when Ben Mendelsohn came out in his normal clothes and kind of they interviewed, he was very charming and funny, but he didn't, I think either he didn't want to do it or he was under strict orders not to. He didn't give us anything.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, it was like a little fashion show, and that was cool to kind of see what those, after all that talk about what we talked out on, was it the previous show that we went page by page over the Entertainment Weekly. We'd kind of,
it was 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. And then we, to see that stuff in motion, which, I mean, even like, like I was like, oh, it's got that. I was thinking like all the things that we had said that turned out to be completely wrong, which I love that, actually, to be honest. The fact that armor is more shiny, it's not, it doesn't have a mottled texture to it that had been beads of water. And then the weird thing is that after all that time we had talked about how they were photoshopped in the Maldives, it turns out like, no, they were really in the Maldives.
They were actually in the Maldives. Yeah, no, I was completely wrong about that, which I was pleasantly surprised at. I was like, oh wow, that's great.
That doesn't mean that they didn't Photoshop the...
Yeah, I wonder if they could have airbrushed
the splashes and like, oh, it looks a little weird when they in contact with the water. I definitely would say that yes, those EW or Entertainment Weekly images had been...
They've probably been touched up.
They've been manipulated on some level, but they weren't completely created in the lab, so to speak. But the big reveal. I mean, one of the reasons I got up for this is I assumed that we were going to get a full trailer.
Yeah,
and we didn't. We got now they just call it
the sizzle reel.
The sizzle reel, which is
celebration reel,
which is kind of like when they say sizzle reel, it's like that's that's an industry term, and it's like that weird kind of transference when you're watching something and you're like, I guess on some level, like you said before, you're being marketed to, but then they use the marketing terms.
Right.
It's like, what are they going to...
if I'm doing that, I'm being honest that I'm being advertised to, right? Like if I called it like the new behind the scenes look, that like, I feel like saying that is more naive. But if I say, oh yeah, the sizzle reel, like I'm at least acknowledging like, yeah, this is like an industry thing that they're showing to people to get them excited. But yeah, no, we didn't get a second trailer or a first official trailer that we know of. I mean, so they showed this 3-minute or however long it is kind of behind the scenes look, and then the folks there at Celebration got to watch what was called like a sneak peek, but from the descriptions I read, it sounds like maybe that could be the trailer that ends up going to movie theaters.
Yeah, but then they said some of the effects were unfinished, and they were also saying that it was only about a minute long. So
movie trailers. I mean, how long are movie trailers?
Well, I
anymore?
mean,
I don't remember.
the teaser
They're probably
was
longer than
the teaser was
yeah.
2 minutes long.
Yeah, that's true.
So why would the trailer? But yeah, I mean, I'm nitpicking, but
Yeah.
I think if I'm being honest, I think I don't want to use the word mistake, but I think what they were trying to do was they were just trying to go, well, let's just use all the Marvel. Let's dip into the Marvel playbook. Let's dip into the Force Awakens playbook that did so well last summer, and let's just do that But I think it's like, that kind of marketing is not one size fits all. It's when they. I mean, I didn't dislike the sizzle reel. It's just when you've been told trailer, and there was all this confusion that lasted into the evening because there had been this whole thing about ABC was doing something, and they were like, "Oh, well, they're saving it for the trailer for ABC tonight," and it turned out it was the sizzle reel again, and with apparently, and I guess credits maybe go to Blast Points because I didn't see this and I was listening to their coverage, and they said that there was some extra Ben Mendelsohn conversation on ABC, and that was the only difference. There wasn't anything from the minute teaser, and there was some technical issues live, which they obviously pulled away because they wanted to kind of give. I think they wanted to give people that came all the way to Celebration Europe something that they could only get by getting on an airplane or buying a ticket, which I totally understand. I mean, we'll see something eventually. It's nice that they went out of their way to give them something special like that. And I've only seen a brief, maybe a 10-second, like somebody surreptitiously had filmed a little bit of it, but they also in the middle of it they got scared and and just did the audio. So it didn't quite work, and it was pulled down pretty quick.
Yeah, and that actually touches on kind of a bigger question that I want to talk more about at the end of the show once we kind of go through a little more of what we did learn at Celebration. And we did learn a little more about the movie, about Rogue One. We got a little more information about K2SO, the droid that Alan Tudyk plays. We find out that he is Cassian Andor's best or maybe only friend in the rebellion, at least when the movie starts. I assume Cassian Andor makes another friend or two over the course of the movie.
Maybe. Who knows?
Maybe that's the mystery.
It's like he's gone from people thinking he's Biggs to being like a Biggs fanboy or something like that.
Right.
I dress like Biggs. I love Biggs. And there's like, God, that's that guy, Cassian Andor. He thinks he's Biggs Darklighter. What a nut job.
When is he going to give it a rest?
Give it a rest. The mustache doesn't make the man makes the mustache.
We also learned 2 new planet names, Scarif and Jeddah. Scarif is that paradise planet where they filmed in the Maldives. Jeddah is, I guess it sounds like maybe where they meet, where they pick up a couple of the characters.
Yeah, I mean,
it's like a Mecca. It's like a Mecca kind of place where people who are not Jedi, but they believe in the Force and they love the Jedi, they like go and make a pilgrimage to this planet called Jeddah.
Yeah, and it's it's an occupied planet by the Empire, and that was like, and I guess that's what they're saying, that either Chirrut and Baze, they were there, either they live there or they are
they met up with everyone else there.
They're on a pilgrimage there, and that's kind of where they're met, but that's about as much as they went into it. Yeah.
So what do you think about that idea though, of this planet where like Force believers who are not Jedi themselves, but they believe in the Force, that they go on this pilgrimage to Jeddah?
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of it's really hard, really weird. For them to kind of, they did this in The Force Awakens, and that the idea that Lor Santeca was the Church of the Jedi, and that actually, I mean, I think the whole village that kind of on that upper plateau in The Force Awakens, they were supposed to all be followers. And
Interesting.
That's why they were all. That's why I think the First Order just kind of slaughtered them all, because they were like, oh, they're all like Force worshippers or whatever. They never say that explicitly. And this idea that like, okay, here's another planet, and it's a sacred place to people that follow the Jedi, and it's being occupied by the Empire. It's like, I understand. I mean, it's a trope. I wonder what the wisdom of kind of, after all these years of Star Wars starting to reframe this as a religious thing. Yeah, and I guess I'll say, and this comes up in Rebels this season too. I don't want to jump to that just yet, but I will say that, I've been reading interviews with Dave Filoni now, and conversations that he had with George Lucas at one point in time, that, this idea that the Force is just this thing that's out there, and, as Yoda says, it's part of every living thing. It surrounds us and binds it, or I guess this is Obi-Wan now. It surrounds us and binds us and keeps the galaxy together. So that the Force isn't necessarily, it's not that only the Jedi and only the Sith believe in the Force, and that the Jedi and the Sith are just two particular sects, or these, there's one religion, two particular religious groups, I guess. Which, I mean, and also, like you said, I there are traces of that in The Force Awakens too, where I don't think Snoke or Kylo Ren or the Knights of Ren or whomever, I don't think that they're particularly Sith, and I think J.J. Abrams actually said this, right? They're not particularly Sith. They believe in the dark side, maybe, or they use the dark side of the Force, but that doesn't necessarily make them Sith. And so, yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like we're going to, both in Rogue One and maybe Episode 8, and Rebels and a few other things, that we're going to get this kind of bigger picture of what the Force is and who believes in it and who uses it and what it means for the galaxy. We're going to get kind of a bigger picture, a bigger story of the Force over the next several years. And it'll be interesting to see how people react to that, whether people are like, oh, I love that they're expanding, my knowledge of the Force, or whether they're going to be people who are like, but I thought the Sith were what about the Rule of Two and all these comic books I've read, there's that side of it too, which, yeah, I don't know. The Jedha, the specifics of it itself, I mean, I think the idea of, maybe not even people who believe in the Force, but people who remember the Jedi and, kind of remember what they did and appreciated what they did, making pilgrimages to places that were considered sacred by the Jedi, or like old Jedi temples. Like, I think that makes a lot of sense. The fact that they've like put this on one particular planet and called that planet Jeddah, it's like, all right, so are we going to learn more in like Episode 8 about this place? Like, why wouldn't that place where they make the pilgrimage, why wouldn't that be the first Jedi temple on Ahch-To? Right. It's why Jeddah, I guess, would be my question. And I assume we'll find out more about that in maybe the novelization of the movie, or some non-film property, or maybe a different film. But yeah, it's like the idea of it, I think, is interesting. It's how they're going about it. I'm like, all right, we'll wait and see how this goes, and maybe it'll make sense, and maybe we'll just have more questions. Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to. My opinion is that the wait and see approach to it. It's just the idea that I get nervous when because the thing about like the original, the way the Force was always described by Lucas, it was so amorphous. It could be anything. It's like, it's yes, the midichlorian aspect of it. In some ways, I wonder if the midichlorian, this thing was Lucas's way of trying to pull it out of the metaphysical and the idea that it dealt with a concept of a higher power and a greater like an intelligent design kind of thing. And see, this is where I get nervous about these ideas of if they're having churches and things like that, then all of a sudden then there's allegorical concerns about things that are going on in the real world.
Right.
And it's like, well, how are they going to portray this? Are they going to, and without having seen anything, I don't want it to be like a thing where it's like all of a sudden they're, trying to say where it feels like they're maybe trying to say a bigger thing about something in real life, where it's like when they start having these conventions that are not, and I don't mean that as a group of people, just as an idea, conventions that exist in the real world, and then people start to have opinions about how it's portrayed, and maybe certain ideas of sensitivities in this world about like, hey, there are a lot of our major religions have holy places that people go to, and they can be, and these places can be, important to some people and quite contentious to others. I just wonder if it's like how they're going to deal with this in a way as to not make it allegorical and have people go like, oh, this is, you even referred to Jeddah as a Mecca, it's this idea.
People, and that's, I borrow, like other people have made that.
Yeah, and you're not the first one, and the idea that, maybe that Baze and Chirrut are on a basically a Star Wars equivalent of a Hajj, going to a sacred place as a, you're thinking like, wow, this is really, and I'm same word, allegorical. This is very kind of like, this is something we know in our lives. And it's like, I'm wondering is like, how far down the rabbit hole does Disney want to go with portraying the Jedi and the thing as what we understand to be like a faith.
Right.
Rather than, it's almost kind of a, even though martial arts for some people it's takes place of almost kind of a religion too, in the fact that it like a holistic approach to life and their physicality. It's like, but that was always kind of in that sense. It was almost like a discipline. Right. Like they were monkish, the Jedis were monkish, but you didn't get to, only occasionally would they talk about, a lot of the dogma was just very kind of like, we are not, we're not crude matter, we're luminous beings, and just this kind of amorphous kind of thing. Like that could mean anything. But now when they're having these conventions that are very tied into our modern life, it always just makes me think, it's like, are they really going down this road? And if they don't do it right, it could, you could tick some people off.
Yeah. And the word you used was amorphous, but I think you could also say, in some ways, universal. And,
yes.
And Lucas, when he was writing the original trilogy and, or devising the original trilogy, he borrowed from a lot of different traditions, and a lot of those were maybe Asian influences, but, there was probably some Celtic influences, pagan influences, and about nature, and he borrowed from enough different traditions and kind of got to the core of what was common of all of those things, and then used that to build this kind of universal principles of like what the Force is and does, and as you say, make it very kind of general. And once you start talking about, well, there are Jedi and Sith, right? If they're just those two groups, then okay, you're fine. But once you start saying, well, there's Jedi and Sith, and there's this other church, and then this group of other believers, and this other group of dark side, then you raise the potential for, I don't know what other word to use, but sectarian violence, really, between, well, this group of light side users disagrees with that group of light side users, and they think that each, they're the ones who are correct about what the Force is and does. And, not that I think they're going to go in that, anyone is planning on going that direction, but it certainly kind of opens up those possibilities for the future. And maybe there is a director who's going to come in and say like, oh, well, what if, who knows? Maybe that's even going to be what Episode 8 is, because we have Snoke and we have Kylo Ren and we have Hux, and now suddenly we have Benicio del Toro as a villain. What role is he? Like, what if he is the leader of some different group that believes and follows the dark side, and it's a power struggle between him and Snoke for like which interpretation and which use of the dark side will prevail. And like you said, that just opens it up for people to draw parallels with contemporary events, and like that is not really the way they need to go with this. I mean,
even at the first blush, it takes people out of the experience, because then immediately, well, at least with my brain, is I start making connections,
right?
And then that's kind of the thing I love about Star Wars, is I can kind of just put my my little paradigm that I exist in, I can put it on the shelf, and as you get older, it gets harder and harder to do it. It's like, I kind of want these to be kids movies. I mean, I kind of want it to be orientated for 9 to 13-year-old young people,
where they don't have to think about like, oh wow, that sounds a lot like
this sounds like the
these versus the Chias or whatever.
And it's just like, well. And to be honest, we haven't gotten any kind of explicit reasoning that like that's exactly where we're going. It's just,
but the language they're using and some of these concepts that they're using certainly opens it up to these kinds of conversations, which in and of itself is like, I don't know if that's the best.
I mean, the Star Wars framework, as a franchise or whatever, it's not strong enough for these kind of questions. I've always believed that, and I obviously people might have other opinions, but at least how I see it is that this is fun. It's very complex escapism, but when you start skirting the edges of reality and how our world really kind of works, about how we look at things and how the deep divisions in life, I mean, gosh, God forbid that they're actually thinking somehow that they're gonna we're gonna have Star Wars, and the people will understand if they look it through Star Wars that maybe in real life it'll carry on. It's like, nah, don't sell me a corporate product that thinks it's gonna fix our problems in life. It's like, and I don't like to. The funny thing is, I don't even really think about this until I started talking about it. It's kind of like as you're hearing it, it's occurring to me. It's kind of like, I'm not saying that like you can never have anything like this. I just think it's like they have to be careful, and like look at like the book that I keep going back to, Bloodlines, which the more I think about it, is like that was a great book, and you should really go read it. That they dealt with this idea of political ideas and uncomfortable things that exist in our world, like terrorism, the concept of like the false flag, and even a little bit, which I know is a very kind of like, that's in the realm of your Alex Jones type stuff. But I mean, just that they had, she put the kind of a potpourri of kind of philosophical, political ideas and stuff, and I think that works so much better in these books that they do. Which, those books are they've already shown that now these books have a great realm to explore that, and maybe the movies aren't, because you can't do it with subtlety. You can't, I don't know. It's, all they said is it's a planet called Jeddah, and it was a sacred Jedi thing, and they're on a pilgrimage. I mean, they're on a
pilgrimage.
And I'm putting a lot on that short 3 sentences or whatever, but
no, but I mean, I don't think you're alone in that. I think a lot of fans are kind of, we're left sort of reading the tea leaves what little new information we did get.
Yeah, I mean, they do bring this. They do kind of when they only parse out slow, and I understand that they're parsing it out a little bit to hear. And like I said, maybe this in the end it might just all be for naught, and it'll just be like, oh, that was just they'll just call it Jeddah, and they'll never say what it was for, and that was just something that. Maybe they had a conversation in the makeup chair, and Gareth Edwards came out and said, like, where am I exactly? Why, where am I, and what are we up to this week? Oh, you guys are on a pilgrimage or something. Don't worry about it. Just make sure you hold your staff high. It's like, it might turn out to be like they never intended to go into those questions, and I'm reading too much into it. But, if that's what they're doing, tread lightly, guys, come on now. Let's not turn this into something that's, I don't think Star Wars is a thing that, has a lot of controversy to it. Even as big as it is, I'm trying to think about like, what are they, just the dumb things, like the people that get worked up about, casting issues and whatnot.
Right. I mean, I think to the extent that it's controversial, that like the process is controversial, right? Like either the EU business or whether the prequels are good,
right?
Or, it's not necessarily the material itself isn't as controversial,
right? I mean, aside from some
or like the big picture, like the way these movies are made, like that's, or the way that the Star Wars universe is managed, that's what's controversial.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like a lot of that kind of stuff can be, like, I don't know. I mean, I guess I've said everything I need to say about it. I'll just be talking in circles at this point.
Well, so another thing that we, I guess, learned, Kathleen Kennedy strongly indicated that we would not get an opening crawl with Rogue One. How do you feel about that?
I'm all right with that. At first I was like, what do you mean, a Star Wars movie without an opening crawl? That's ridiculous. But I think it's incumbent on them to set themselves aside from the, quote, saga movies. The fact that, like, they're pushing forward a much larger story in the universe. Whereas, like, no, they're telling one story. It's John Knoll saying, hey, we should tell the story about how they got those plans. Mm-hmm. And I think that unfortunately, you end up with a low stakes kind of situation where you basically have to go out there and say, yeah, this is a kind of a low stakes story because we know that they win. We just don't know how they win, and we don't know who makes it from beginning to end, and the decisions that make the or that influence the win or what. It's like I said, they're kind of they're rewriting the book on this stuff, and it's kind of like, yeah, I think it's smart, and I almost wonder if it's kind of a protection. Like, yeah, if they do one that and it just completely tanks, they can kind of retcon it out. It's like they can fix it. They can honestly go, well, we always consider the saga films to be the true Star Wars, and all the standalone films, those are just legends of the galaxy, or it's like, so now they're legending out their movies. But I mean, there is a kind of a way where they, I get the feeling, and nobody said this explicitly, that Disney probably has they're probably going to do up to episode 12, and then like, in the next 10-15 years, and then they'll probably put themselves in the vault and, and let it kind of settle for a while. But I think that, these anthology films are, they don't need, I mean, I think it's like, it'll be so obvious what their stories are about. The only downside is that they're going to have to introduce people in a different way. They're going to have to, like I said, like in the sizzle reel, Gareth Edwards had said, what is the terminology used? He's like coming so close or to my favorite movie, or coming right up against it.
Oh, right.
But if I don't add anything, then what's the point? That kind of thing. And I think that's really the philosophy that going forward is like, well, if we don't change it up a little bit, then we're just kind of, it becomes like almost like a resuscitation of like, well, the Star Wars movie is this. We enter with this, Lucasfilm logo, then we do the crawl, and then the crawl disappears, and then a ship appears.
They don't want it to become rote, essentially.
Right. I mean, I just like the idea, and I don't know why I'm even wasting your guys' time listening to this, but I keep having this vision of like, what would the first scene of a non-crawl thing look? And I just have this image of like, the Lucasfilm logo, and then they kind of pull this thing, and then you're seeing like, jungle, and you're hearing like the sounds of animals, and and then boom, and then it's like, then very, very conservatively in the lower right hand corner in that, I think it just says Rogue One, and they don't explain any of it,
right? And
it just like slowly, then it beats, either it's cutting through like shots of somebody running through the jungle, so you're cutting between silence and the heart beating, and then you're just boom, you're seeing Cassian or whoever running from Imperials or fighting Imperials, and then that way you get people are all gonna, at this point, they're gonna have to do such a good job letting people know, this is a Star Wars movie and it's not a sequel to Episode 7. And I think they'll be able to do it. I think people are smart. Yeah. I think people are smart enough. And I think even if you go in and people are just like, what's this Star Wars Rogue One? Let's just walk in. I think if they know anything about Star Wars, that they'll get it. And if Gareth Edwards, I know that, you're not a big fan of his necessarily. I think
I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But
I was going to say, I like him a little bit better, but I think if he does his job, and like I say, you're probably going to touch on this, is that we got to know him a little bit better this weekend. That if he does his job right, it won't matter. Because it's just going to be you're going to walk out and like, it was a really great movie. I don't know. I don't really care if it was Star Wars or not. It was just really good. I think that's kind of like, at least I think I have a real, personally, I think I have a capacity for that because I like movies like that where it's like, I will watch something that, I like to watch, even modern war movies. And, I don't sit there and think about like, well, what's the historical truth? I mean, I don't watch like when they have like, I'll just use Black Hawk Down because I'm seeing it on my shelf. I actually really like Black Hawk Down as a movie.
Black Hawk Down.
Yeah. What did I say? Oh, anyway. Yeah. Black Hawk Down. And there's a whole reality to it about how all that really went down in real life. And I don't know about it. I don't think when I watch that movie that I'm like, oh yeah, it's
not a documentary.
This is exactly how it happened. But, Ridley Scott made, a very tense war film with a certain political slant to it, but it's like, you can just enjoy it viscerally. It's like watching a Western without thinking about, what happened, what Western expansion really meant for this country. It's kind of like, and I think that's kind of incumbent on Gareth Edwards to make kind of a movie in the sense that you're watching an action movie that has all the great Star Wars characters, but it's like you can't rely on the fact that like you're pushing forward a narrative. It's like, no, you're telling a very encapsulated story.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about that too, and wondering, it's not just the opening crawl that has become, that's like the iconic bit of it, but it's also become the standard, even that J.J. Abrams has continued forward with, where you have the opening crawl and then it kind of it either stays where it is or it pans down into a field of stars, and then some kind of ship comes in to view, or either from above or from the left. So I even wonder, like, okay, well, is it going to maybe just start that way and they're just not going to have a crawl, or as you say, is it going to start on actually on a planet somewhere? Is it going to start inside a spaceship, or it's just gonna feel really different, I think, and I'm still not sure how prepared I am for that, honestly. And I guess I have 5 months to get myself prepared, but
I mean to be honest, you might come out and go, something, I don't like it when they do this.
Yeah,
I like it as it's a space opera. It's a Wagnerian space opera with, where it's the ring theory. It's cyclical.
Right.
It's like, that's the kind of thing where it's, when you do what they, I guess it's a reboot versus a reimagining, you do kind of come against in both ways. You come up against your history. It's kind of like how much can you sidestep what you love about Star Wars to enjoy what Star Wars is now.
Right. Well, we all have this kind of groove in our brain,
right,
of like, oh, this is how a Star Wars movie starts. That's probably not going to be true anymore.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying, because there's part of me that feels that way. Of a certain orthodoxy of how Star Wars is made.
Right.
And we will kind of, it's like we had to have that sea change of like, hey, it's like I'm watching a Star Wars movie and I'm 45 minutes into it and there's not a single character I know. That's kind of, I was watching, again, I was watching Force Awakens last night as I want to do. And I was like, 45, it's like almost 45, 50 minutes before you see Han Solo, and it's like these are all new characters. It's like it's
and that part of the movie, like it works pretty well. Like it moves along at a pretty decent pace. You're engaged, and you're at least me. Some fans may have been, but I wasn't necessarily sitting there going, "When does Han Solo show up?"
Right.
I was like, "Okay, these are interesting characters that I want to kind of see what happens with them."
Yeah.
But so you alluded to my nervousness, dissatisfaction with whatever however you want to describe it, with Gareth Edwards. And Gareth Edwards, and then also this being kind of a gritty war movie. And you and I have talked about that a bunch of times. I don't want to rehash all of it, but I will say I'm coming around a little bit to both having Gareth Edwards as the director, but then also more broadly having this be, like a gritty war film, for two reasons. One is that, I can't remember who said this. It was probably Kathleen Kennedy, describing how Gareth Edwards, or maybe it was one of the actors, describing how sometimes Gareth Edwards would just, they would be filming and then all of a sudden he would just like put the camera on his shoulder and really get in there, and have this kind of like you are there quality to it. And, I was thinking about it, and this was even before we've learned that episode 8 was partly inspired by various World War II movies. So I was thinking this last weekend, but, there are kind of 2 points that I thought about that started to turn me around a little bit. One is that, George Lucas's style, at least in the 70s and 80s, was very kind of documentarian, right? Like these are events that are actually happening, and we just put a camera and like we're filming this thing as it's happening. That was kind of his approach. And you could argue that, and I guess I would be arguing that in some ways, that Gareth Edwards, putting the camera on his shoulder and having that kind of you are there quality, that's also kind of a documentary style. The thing is just that the way documentaries are shot has changed over the last several decades, and the news coverage of wars has changed, and you have these embedded reporters now, and this sense that either the viewer or the reader or whomever, that they want to get the person consuming this thing, as close to as possible, to feel what it's actually like to like be there, to understand what the soldiers are going through, and to have a better sense of what war is actually like. Right there's that kind of style that is become more popular over the last several decades, and so if you take that into account, then Edwards, making this a kind of a gritty war movie. And the way he's doing it is, you could argue that that's just kind of an extension of the original look and feel of the original trilogy, right? And particularly too, as A New Hope, borrowed a lot of shots, verbatim essentially from World War II movies. Lucas, for the work print or for the in the dailies, when they had effect shots that weren't done yet, or at least to show the effects teams what shots he wanted, he would edit in World War II, fighter pilot, movies and footage, and so that's always sort of been part of the Star Wars DNA and the visual language of Star Wars. It's just a matter of what those terms mean and how those things are shot and filmed and edited. Like that's changed a bit. And so I'm still a little, because of that, like I'm still a little nervous about, to what extent is that kind of camera on the shoulder, you are there, you're embedded with this unit, to what extent is that style going to fit within a Star Wars movie? I don't know, but at least in the broad sense, I've kind of come around to, okay, you know what, this is pretty close to what some of Lucas's original ideas and his original style was. It's just that in the broad sense it is. It's just that the way those things are done has changed over the last couple decades. And so it's a continuation, it's an evolution rather than like a completely new idea.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And you alluded to that a little bit, talking about, Black Hawk Down and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like that thing where it's, his whole, Lucas's paradigm was really like Vietnam. And that was a very different, I mean, that was the first, they always call it the first televised war. And now it's completely normal for like, now I think of like, it's probably now, and I'm thinking about things that are 14 years old now.
Well, but that is still
now they get in. Now they're right in the tanks when they go into when they're actually like landing in some area, and you're just like, it's interesting because it's like it'll be interesting if he's going to do like a mixed media situation. One of the big things, one of the big criticisms of Godzilla, when Gareth Edwards' Godzilla was that he almost got a little too good about hiding Godzilla. And, and a lot of it was taking place in, kids watching it on TV while out of the corner, you see the mother horrified, but you're only really seeing this much. It's like, or like, here comes the big battle, and then they're closing the door, and you can't see what's going on. It's like, I understand that was a stylistic choice, and it's like, I hope that's not like a signature kind of like, I use, like all the goodies are going to get obscured at the last second or viewed through macro binoculars or whatever I forget is that what they're called? The Star Wars binoculars? But
macro binoculars? Yeah. I feel like they have a couple different names for them. Right.
And that kind of stuff, it's like, is it, are we only going to have all these beautiful planets and thing, and we're only going to see, over Cassian Andor's shoulder or something like that? It's like getting right in there. And I mean, I think that's the weird thing about that sizzle reel is that they were trying to do the whole like real effects, real sets. Like you're in there and and then there's that weird shot where I assume it's Felicity Jones and
Diego
Luna, and it's like a big chunk of cardboard lands on her. Did you see that shot? I'm like, ouch! I don't think that shot's going to get used. It's that kind of.
Yeah. I don't know how much of what we saw in that behind the scenes thing. How much of that is actually footage that's going to end up in the movie or not.
What we forgot to talk about on this list? We forgot to talk about the poster.
Oh, we can talk about that later.
Okay.
Let's talk a little more about this behind the scenes video since we're on it.
Okay.
What did you think? Did it get your excitement up to see the movie? Or are you still like, I don't know how much of this is going to make it in? Are you more nervous now? Like, what was your initial reaction, and what are you thinking now?
Well, at first I was like, they're doing a sizzle reel. They're not like they kind of like I felt like the nomenclature or whatever they had used had confused me, and it's like we're not getting any new music. It's all like it sounded like library music to me. They're telling me things that you don't need to keep telling me how much this means to you. It's like I know it means a lot to you because you proved it with The Force Awakens. Let's just take it as tacit that that Disney cares about Star Wars. It's,
right.
I don't know. It's that kind of thing where it's like, I think I'd rather not see as much behind the scenes thing until I see the movie. It's it becomes this confusing thing where it's like, well, that shot looks so great. Well, that's just that was just somebody on set with a camera taking a picture of something else that's being between shots. So that's not even a shot from the film. That's just Donnie Yen taking a break because his contacts burn his eyes, so he closes his eyes or whatever. But I mean, I like I said, I didn't know what little things like what's the tube station that was famously used. I mean, I think that's a great use. I love that idea because I told anybody that would ever listen to me about how, George Lucas used the BART's tunnels for THX 1138. And then they go, that's great. What's a THX 1138? Right. But, that kind of stuff is cool, but it's like, that's not really how you sell a movie to somebody. It's like kind of, it's like, and it didn't feel like a that much of a pullback of a curtain. I honestly got more out of it, and I apologize if I'm jumping ahead on this, but I got more out of the idea that Gareth Edwards and George Lucas actually sat down.
Yeah.
I thought
that was interesting.
That was really interesting, because I'm thinking it's like, well, yeah, maybe this is the one because I don't think he was on the Force Awakens set.
Yeah, I don't know if Lucas was on set or if Edwards just like showed him dailies or like a rough cut of things, because I imagine they're still working in post-production.
No, that was at least that was at the Rogue One panel. It's like,
oh yeah.
He was there. They had pictures, and then he said Lucas was walking around the sets and complaining about it, and then like he was freaked out, and turned out that Lucas was just kind of messing with him a little bit.
Well, which I find funny, because he was like, yeah, Lucas had, his very dry sense of humor, so he would be joking, but my heart would be racing, and part of me was like, yeah, I don't know that he was totally joking though. Because that is, I mean, he does kind of have a dry humor, and there's sarcasm there, but I think a lot of time there's always like a little bit of truth behind it too.
Well, I mean,
like when if you watch, and I keep mentioning these, but if you watch any of that behind the scenes material that's been released for the prequels, he's like Lucas is constantly making jokes about how much he like hates being there, right? Or I guess there's one where he's in California. He's getting ready to go to Australia to start filming, and he's telling the staff in California, he's like, it'll be hell till I get back, and when I get back, it'll be worse. And he like says it as a joke, and like people laugh, but like the truth is like, yeah, they have a ton of work to do, and Lucas is miserable while he's directing. Like, he's been on the record saying that it makes him miserable. So like, yeah, it's a joke, but he's telling the truth,
right?
So I do kind of wonder, where he's saying like, oh, it's always, we never, you're ruining my franchise or whatever, or like, oh, this is what I get for selling off the franchise, whatever jokes he was making. Like, yeah, I'm sure he like laughed afterwards, and he like kind of meant it as a joke, but I would be curious to know what specifically he said to Gareth Edwards, because I would bet some of those things probably had an element of truth in them, at least for the Dorcas.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that's part of the fun of it. It's this idea, like, I think that's his way of saying, yeah, this is not how I would have done it. And then he's like, but this is your show. I mean, right. That's the funny thing is, the only time George was ever even mentioned was Gareth Edwards, and he had done that, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for George kind of thing. I mean, it was, like I said, there was a very different kind of tone to this. Even in some ways, like, JJ last year kind of ended up being like a surrogate Lucas, like between him and Kathy Kennedy, they kind of were the surrogate Lucas. Like, they didn't really talk about him in and of this. I don't really remember what they talked about, what they didn't talk about, but this idea that was, the energy was all focused on JJ Abrams and this idea, and this time it was very spread out. I mean, there was a lot of kind of the Lucasfilm luminaries, from Dave Filoni to Kiri Hart. She was in most of these panels, even though she's obviously not a person. Yeah,
she would show up on these panels and then she wouldn't talk much.
Yeah, she wouldn't really say much. I mean, I think and she's the boss, and Pablo Hidalgo, who doesn't, his name isn't on the scripts or anything like that, but he's he's kind
of the public face of he's answering everyone's canon questions
between him and Dave Filoni, which is kind of they must have to constantly go back and forth about how they're going to do it. It was a very different feel, in the sense that there is like no there's no person that they keep going, this is the guy who's going to, even though JJ was only signed up for one film, I think a lot of people tried to think that he was the mastermind behind all of it,
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, it was interesting too, hearing, one thing I will say is I think Gareth Edwards is genuinely excited to be making a Star Wars movie. And so that too, it kind of softened a little bit. Not that I ever doubted he didn't want to do this, but just seeing how excited he was, and seeing him, like there was a different panel where he showed up in a stormtrooper costume, doing stuff like that, being willing to do stuff like that, and comparing that to kind of J.J. Abrams and how he kind of presented himself and his excitement at doing it. And again, I don't doubt that J.J. Abrams was like genuinely excited to work on a Star Wars movie. But I guess the way they expressed that was a little different, and it was like, oh, Gareth Edwards like loves doing this. That's nice to see that he got to do one. Then it was kind of like that. That's kind of how I felt about it at some points. I was like, oh, he clearly like loves doing this. Good for him.
Yeah, I was about ready to go on to some kind of thing about how Gareth Edwards was a millennial, but he's not. It's like he's my age, but
and I think we said that about Rian Johnson too, right? Like,
it's like
thought he was a lot younger.
Yeah,
than he actually is.
They always skew a lot younger, but both Rian Johnson and Gareth Edwards are like 41 years old. They're not children. I mean, Lucas was 28 when he made Star Wars. It's kind of he wasn't a millennial, but
right. At the time, he was like the young hotshot, and
you're
right. We think of these guys as young because maybe they don't have a ton of movies under their belt, but they're also a little older. The behind the scenes video, at least for me, the sizzle reel, it was very similar to the one they did for The Force Awakens, where you had people involved in the movie. They had Gareth Edwards, they had Warwick Davis, and Felicity Jones, talking about how great it was, how excited they were to be doing a Star Wars, and the advantages of doing practical effects and practical sets, and that stuff I didn't really care about. Even seeing the behind the scenes of the shots of them filming the thing, I didn't really care much about. The one thing that I thought was kind of interesting was seeing Donnie Yen. There's a scene where he is facing off with the stormtrooper, and he has his stick, his staff, and sort of like, I don't think he was choreographing at the moment, but they were, they're kind of going through the beats of like, okay, then I kick the staff up and twirl it around and put it up against your neck. I thought that was really interesting, and I am curious now. I haven't looked this up as to know whether Donnie Yen choreographed his fights or whether they had someone else do it. I mean, I would think even if they had someone else who, directed, choreographed those, whatever, having Donnie Yen there is such like a big advantage, because he's done tons of those scenes. He has been a director himself. Like he's choreographed a bunch of fight scenes himself. Like he knows, like, okay, if the camera is there, then I know you want me to do this with my left hand, but if my camera is there, then maybe it makes more sense to do it with my right hand, or like I should be on this side of the guy. So that's having someone there who has all that experience, I think would be that's just such a huge advantage. And so, I'm kind of curious. I'm scrolling through, IMDb now. They have the stunt department coordinator, but that's not usually the same as the action choreographer or whatever. I'd be curious to know how much input Donnie Yen has had on his fight scenes, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, considering that he is known for that, it's the same way that when an actor sits down with their script and goes, well, I think he should be angry when he says this, and then cool off immediately. Yeah. I bet you anything that's kind of like, he's got that extra level of like, well, I got to be angry and then cool off, and then I grab the guy, and then, it's like, like you said, it'd be easier if at this point I'm standing here and, I'll knock his helmet off and then hit him or something, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I think he's got to be involved in it, at least on some level. I mean, I would hope. I mean, I'm sure he's also, even though he has all this experience and he's been a director himself, like it was probably, that's not to say that he does it for every movie he does. And, he does movies where he's just hired to be the actor, and, he's cool with that, and, lets the other people do their jobs. But, it is such a great resource, and one, honestly, that they haven't had before in a Star Wars movie. So I'll be interested to see how that works out. I mean, I guess you had it in some respect, because I was watching Ray Park's panel
Yeah,
And,
that's true.
Ray Park was the way he talked about his, kendo, I think was his big judo kendo. I think that was his big Darth Maul moves. He was I've seen the behind the things. He was very involved in the one-on-one choreography with Ewan and Liam Neeson and their stunt people or whatever. The kind of thing where I think it's like, yeah, it would behoove them, for these directors, and I think George was able to, and I assume Gareth Edwards, that you utilize the skills you have, the skill set you have there. It's like you're already paying the guy. He's going to know how to, when you've made that, I'm talking about Donnie Yen, when you've made as many films as he has, he probably he knows. If I do this, it's not going to look as good on film as if you do that. And it's like, I know a lot of Gareth Edwards stuff is a lot of big scale stuff. It's like intimate conversations and big scale action. If you look at the kind of what the monsters and Godzilla had, so maybe it wouldn't have been his forte. So hopefully he availed himself of his expertise, but I think he has.
Yeah. And then the other thing that got me super excited from the behind the scenes video were just seeing all of the different costumes and the costume design. It's like, they looked really good. I guess we don't have to go through all of them because we've been talking about this for a while already, but just seeing what the different kind of trooper uniforms and helmets look like. And I think this was the first time we got a close look at the tank troopers. I don't know what they're really called, but the ones driving the tank, and what their helmets look like and how those are different, and some of the different aliens and just other people. One thing I really liked was seeing different people wearing masks or breathing apparatuses or whatever, and that's we had a few of those kinds of costumes on Jakku in The Force Awakens, but before that I was like, man, those were some of the great things about the original trilogy is having like Zuckuss or some of the people on Tatooine. It doesn't just have to be an alien. You can have, or it could be an alien plus some kind of breathing apparatus, or just a guy with like a gas mask on, and that can, if you design it right, like that can also be kind of interesting. And so seeing those different kinds of designs and the different colors that they're using, and just the variety of things and the attention to detail, it was each of those shots went by relatively quickly, but I managed to snag screenshots of pretty much all of them, and I posted them on our Tumblr, which is talkingbirdcast.tumblr.com. Not all of them, but most of them. So if you want to see,
and I put a link.
If you want the chance to look at those more closely and spend more time looking at those, you can do so there.
And I put a link to that on the Talking Birdcast site, so you can just go there and it'll link back to it, to the old Tumblr. But it's like, they're that kind of weird mouthpiece looking, white bear thing, and the fat, the fat Mon calamari. I mean, my only hope is that they maybe dwell a little bit longer. I mean, that was the thing about the Force Awakens that I guess I would say I was disappointed with, And in the prequels is the fact that so I think Lucas made a real mistake never actually creating clone armor, and always just superimposing Tamora Morrison's head on these CGI things over and over, and it just looks bad, and it took people out of the movie. And I think if I think people had gone a lot further with him if he'd actually made the armor. I think people missed it, and so it's all back practical effects, blah blah blah. But then, so he does Jakku, and it's in the dark, and then he does Maz Kanata's castle, and then it's like, it's gone in 2 seconds. It's like, I bet if you did a screen, comparison about how long the cantina scene was in A New Hope versus, I think it was probably like maybe 30% shorter. Maybe even less, because it was just like, we didn't get to the Crimson Corsair. We didn't really get to, see those, those weird gambling guys. I'm not saying that you just sit there for 2 minutes, but like his editing was so tight on that it was like almost like, you showed us all this stuff in their sizzle reel, and then it didn't really pay off.
Yeah, I mean, and the Maz Kanata's castle was meant to be a callback to that, cantina scene. And so, I mean, I think too, in this era where we have all this technology available to us to, freeze, pause the YouTube video and do a screen cap of these things. When the movie comes out, people are going to be able to do the same thing. On the one hand, that maybe would drive them to, like you said, put them even there for a brief thing of like, oh, this will be like something that, we want people to watch this movie multiple times and see things that they missed the first time, or that see something new that they missed the fourth time they saw the movie. And, put all of these, neat things in the background for people to kind of go through and hunt for. And I understand that. And I think there's some merit to that. But yeah, you have all these great designs, give them something to do too, other than just like stand there and look around. And in Maz Kanata's castle, both, I'm blanking on her name now, but the kind of black and white Harlequin looking lady who called in the First Order, and then that
Bastine or something like that.
And then, the character that, called in the Resistance. I thought that was great. For exactly the reason that you're talking about. It's like, oh, like there are these great designs, give them something to do other than just sit there and like look at the camera, as it pans around the room. Like give them some personality, give them some kind of point of being there, give them a reason to contribute, let them contribute to the story. And so I'm hoping that will happen a little bit more. I mean, certainly there's that what got called the Space Monkey in a different panel that you saw in that sizzle reel. It's the
Bastan.
Yeah, I think
he's called Bastan.
Yeah, and so, I guess the one standing behind that machine gun and laughing. Yeah, certainly that, I think, assuming that makes it into the movie, they gave that alien some personality, and people are going to love that. People already love that character.
People are talking about it. Like, because Pablo
it's weird that they call it. It's weird that they call it a space monkey to me, because it looks more like a badger. Right? Like it doesn't look like a monkey.
It looks more like what somebody had put on Twitter, which I totally would love to give them thing. Is they looks like Ernest Borgnine.
Yeah, that was actually Anthony Breznican who writes for Entertainment Weekly.
Oh boy, Snake! Oh boy, Snake Plissken in my U-wing. It's just that's what I was. I could. It was like, it looks like an old like a Borgnine or a Carol O'Connor type guy,
right?
Yeah. But it's that's the kind of stuff that that's the kind of stuff
we could have already our breakout alien character from Rogue One.
Yeah, they're probably scrambling right now to say like, oh god, we got to go film some more with that guy because people love that, and we didn't realize it was just going to be something for half a second, and like we got to get back there.
Space Monkey Black Series figure is put immediately into production.
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean that's the thing that I appreciate the most about the movie is not necessarily like, again, not having Gareth Edwards talk about what an honor is to work on Star Wars, or Felicity Jones saying like, oh, practical sets are great, or even seeing like, oh, okay, so they used like a dolly shot where they went in and then they went back. That's I care more about the look of the film, all the design elements of it. That's the part that I've been more curious about, and that seeing I was like, oh, okay, this is gonna look good. Like there's going to be some really cool stuff in this movie. So that's the part that got me the most excited for Rogue One.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I never really answered your question. I've always been excited about this because I'm just
that's true.
I'm willing to go with it. I'm not making a value judgment because your concerns are 100% valid. I guess it's just like I guess my other thing is like, well, I'm not a Star Wars fan who believes that like any criticism is bad and stuff like that's the whole nature of this show. I know there's people out there that are like, any criticism of the prequels or the current thing, it's like I don't want to hear it, and I respect that too, but that's not how I view stuff. So I appreciate your concerns about this, and they're all, like I said, they're all valid.
I appreciate your concerns.
Well, I do. It's like
I know.
I can honestly, there's nothing you've said there that I go, oh come on. It's Star Wars. It's like, no, you're absolutely right. All these things, it's like there is a good chance that no one can write a great Star Wars film except for Lawrence Kasdan. I mean, that is a total.
We don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe someone else can. We just don't know.
We don't know, and I'm not going to sit here and say you need to take it on faith, because it's like, yeah, this sizzle reel. At the end of the day, it felt like something that they would have shown to theaters exhibitors to sell them on a film. To how many screens is AMC going to book for this? But it's Star Wars. I mean, I think we're beyond the point where AMC is going to be like, I think we're only going to do 1,500 theaters on this. It's like, no, if it's a Star Wars movie and it's Christmas, they know people are going to be interested in it. Now, whether or not that's going to, they did have reshoots. I mean, yeah, like some people have said, I love how they were able to very easily. I didn't have questions. I don't think they allowed people to ask questions.
Yeah, I mean, most of these panels, the panel talked for like 55 minutes, and so they only had a few minutes left for questions. Rebels, I guess they had more questions, but
yeah, and they wouldn't want to talk about reshoots and what that meant. They didn't address it. It was a non-issue to them. I mean, they'd already addressed it weeks ago, but I know that in the back of people's minds, reshoots it's a total red flag. The other thing that, and I might be jumping ahead a little bit, but the one thing that, this might not be something that would even come up for months anyway, but we hadn't heard anything. We'd never heard anybody mention Alexander Desplat or something like, oh,
I know.
Like we sat down.
You alluded to the music of this sizzle reel before, and yeah, it just sounded so generic to me.
Yeah, it's
but at the same time, it kind of reminded me of the Godzilla soundtrack, and so part of me was a little worried that did
Desplat do the Godzilla one?
He did. He did Godzilla. And so part of me is a little worried, like, I hope this isn't what the real thing's going to sound like. But you're right. We haven't heard anything about even the soundtrack is going to be released on such and such a date. And
yeah, why would
it's possible they're still recording it now?
Or why don't we hear Gareth Edwards coming out and go, hey, I just want to let you know I've been working with, or like a video, hey, it's on Alexander Desplat. I'm here at the scoring stage, or I'm working at my piano and I'm writing up some wonderful themes, and then maybe he'd play like a 5-second theme or something, and people would go, I mean, I think they're still kind of like, it's that idea is he involved in this still? And do I care if he's involved in it?
Right.
Is there any chance that at the last second they might go, surprise, we've got John Williams is back, that kind of thing. He's coming in, which, I mean, if it meant that he couldn't do 8 because of scheduling, I would never, I would want him to do the saga films until he's like, I can't do anymore. If there had to be a choice made, but it makes you wonder. It's like, how much of a completed film are we really looking at? I think that there's still some tweaks and stuff going on that goes beyond, CGI spaceships and fixing bad wire work or
this dialogue isn't energetic enough.
Right. I think there might be some structural issues, and to be perfectly honest, from what they've showed us so far, it does kind of make you think that, like, how much story is there going to be here? It's like, there's 2 planets in the Death Star set, and it looks like there's a B story involving.
I think there might be at least 3 planets, honestly.
Right.
Right, because the shot of the Death Troopers, right? That burning. You had that kind of like burning field, burning sand, whatever. But then there have also been those shots, I think either in Entertainment Weekly or the Sizzle Reel or both, of these Death Troopers standing in this big grassy field. I don't think you have either of those in Maldives or
right
wherever the other the fire where the fires are. So we might have 3 planets plus the Death Star, and that's the thing too about having if you want an ensemble cast, you need to give every ensemble member it's due, they're due, and you need to give them a story, and you need to give them enough dialogue and like character development to make people care about them. And so that's a lot. That's a lot to juggle.
Well, and I also have a theory about that, and people might want to jump ahead a minute. I'll give you 3, 2, 1. This be spoiler territory here. and I'm pretty much convinced that the whole Mads Mikkelsen thing is a flashback, and that he doesn't actually interact with any of those people, and that it's going to start out with, you know, a young Jyn Erso, and that scene is the troopers coming in. It may be Vader showing up, coming to either this guy that they know he's going to be able to fix it, or he made it once and they're bringing him back to, you know, and he gets killed, and that kind of is the catalyst for Jyn Erso's kind of, you know, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride of a Star Wars experience. You know, it's the kind of, I honestly think we're gonna, like he's talking about not adding, I think we're gonna have flashbacks, or the movie itself might literally start with that. You know, it'll be, but then again, it's like without a crawl, how are you going to explain that? But anyway, are they going to have tiles that say 10 years later, 15 years later, you know, sometime later this afternoon, you know,
or it's going to fade, you know, or not fade, but you know, it's going to be her her face as a child, and then her face as an adult is slowly going to fade in and, and superimpose on that, and so that way you'll know time has passed. And
it's the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade thing, when it's like when they put the hat on River Phoenix and then tip up and it's Harrison Ford, which is pretty masterful, but it's been done before. Gareth, don't do it.
Right. So I think let's leave Rogue One, because do we not
want to talk the poster?
Do you want to talk about the poster?
I just like what was your opinion?
You like it? Do you not like it?
I don't like it.
Yeah, I don't.
I'll leave it at that.
People seem to love it, and I was like,
at first I was like, wait a second. Yeah, first I was like, oh, it looked great, and then I'm like, oh no, it doesn't. It doesn't. It looks like a Carnival Cruise poster.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, the first blush, you're like, hey, you can see yourself in the Bahamas the Maldives wait, are they having a space battle there? Now, talk about CGI people in water.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, no, thumbs down on the poster, but, you know.
Yeah, and having that sort of the Death Star superimposed at the top, like there's something about it, it's just, I think it makes it too busy or something, because you're not really sure, am I supposed to be looking at the Death Star? Am I supposed to be looking at these people running on the beach? Am I supposed to be looking at the stormtroopers? Like it doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I mean, and to be perfectly honest about this stuff, and it breaks my heart to say this, is that the movie poster as an art form is dead. It's dead, because it's like, if I can't, you know, my whole, you know, vector into getting into this was the fact that I love Star Wars as a kid, and I had them in my, you know, every one of these posters. It's like I had to make a conscious decision. It's like, you can't have them all on your wall. You have to make a decision, because there were so many great posters. And you know, in the prequels, they only had one for each movie. And they were like, they're all right. Drew Struzan's great, does a great job, you know. But it's very much kind of a Drew Struzan thing. There aren't 18 different Phantom Menace posters, and you know, there's some great one from Poland that you just have to see. It's like, no, we're at this point now where it's basically a splash image to try to get people at the movie theater to go, well, maybe I won't see this new Diane Keaton movie. I'll go see this one with the big bright colors and stuff. It's literally, I do not, you know, it's like, it's something that, you know, they don't even, half the time they don't even use them in the marketing when it comes out on home video. So really, you know, movie posters as a true art form, as an impressionistic representation of what the movie is about, you know, no offense to whoever made the poster, but you know, it's a disappointment. And I honestly don't think going forward it's going to be something that is important to movie studios. So I guess I better just shut up about it, because it's a dead industry. Anyway, we're going to talk about Rebels?
Yeah, let's talk about Rebels. So the other kind of big-ish panel where they made the biggest news splash was about Star Wars Rebels Season 3. And I guess we'll just cut right to the chase, right? Thrawn making an appearance. That's the biggest news. You also have returning character Maul. I guess he's not Darth Maul anymore. Young Wedge Antilles makes an appearance. You have Tom Baker. We knew Tom Baker was involved, I think, but now we know he's...
I didn't.
We didn't. I could have sworn we talked about it. So anyway, Tom Baker is back as this kind of Force Force character, Force adjacent. He's like in the middle. He's both light and dark. He's a giant moose.
He's the Bendu, which is from Lucas. It's the Jedi Bendu. It's the Journal of the Wills.
Yeah,
it's literally early 74, the Star Wars draft kind of nomenclature.
Right. So those are. We learned some other things from the trailer, which we can touch on, I guess. But Thrawn being the biggest thing. So let's talk about it. So how do you feel about Thrawn being in Star Wars Rebels?
I'm good with it. I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing, especially since Timothy Zahn is going to be being consulted. Yeah. He's writing a tie-in novel, which we don't know anything about because it's still being written. It's not coming out till spring of 2017. The main, it's a chance to kind of maybe update the character in the books. In that great the definitive Thrawn trilogy, it's there was a lot of conventions that have now since been thrown out, the Isla Miri and which I'm kind of glad because kind of like Dave Filoni's kind of take on it and George's take on it was like, yeah, okay, it made sense for the book, but it doesn't really make sense for the true saga of Star Wars that, there's actually creatures that can push back, the Force. And I mean, it was a great vehicle. So we didn't have Luke being able to when he crashed on Merkur, he was able to kind of Jedi his way out of stuff. And it was able for them to how do you approach a crazy, insane Jedi clone? It's you got to have some kind of vehicle to do that.
Right. But I thought, Filoni was asked about, whether, cause I guess if Thrawn is in there now, people are going to ask, is Mara Jade coming back? And he said pretty flat out, no. But the reasoning behind it, he then started talking about the Salamiri and maybe that was sort of his way of saying look, not everything is coming back. We chose Thrawn specifically, but the Salamiri, as he said, it's something I think maybe even he and George talked about, George Lucas, this idea that, well, if the Force is in every living creature or every living creature adds to the Force, you can't have a living thing that negates the Force.
Right.
And so, like you're saying, it makes sense. It maybe made sense in the context of the particular plot that they were going for or that Zahn was going for, but in a broader sense, maybe, it's kind of confusing the issue of what the Force is and isn't. And getting back to what we were saying earlier, if they are going to provide this kind of more expansive view of the Force and everything, then, having these creatures that can negate it, maybe that just complicates things too much.
Right. I mean, it always was an issue in the books even. They're they don't talk about them that much because it's well, wait a second. Why wouldn't somebody just go to Merkur and get those Isla Miri? Or why wouldn't Luke drop a bomb on the planet and say, okay, let's remove this thing. But I mean, back to the Rebels thing. It's the only thing that actually makes me wish is that somehow maybe Thrawn had showed up earlier. It's just if he's going to be, I mean, I always go under the suspicion that we're getting pretty close to the end of Rebels, even though they didn't say anything about it being the last season or anything.
Well, and what's interesting is this wasn't at Celebration, but just it was either today or yesterday, I think, another interview with Filoni got posted somewhere. Someone did an interview with him, and he was talking about, technically the rebellion didn't end until the Battle of Jakku, and so it's he kind of left open this possibility that they could have the Rebel show, run concurrent through all the events of A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi.
Well, that's
so. When I read that initially, I'm kind of two minds. On the first one, I was oh, you're right. That is a way to do it. And then part of me is yeah, but what would that look like?
I mean, the truth is that, it's a big galaxy. There's no reason actually, that would be a little weird, wouldn't it? I'm just thinking about it. Because how the hell are you going to have Ezra and Kanan being Jedi and a neophyte Jedi in the rebellion? Wouldn't they make 2 and 2 together and say hey, Luke, you need to hang out with this Kanan guy because your master's gone.
Right.
Unless,
I mean,
you know.
Yeah, he did, and in talking about Thrawn in this same interview, I think Filoni said, what one of the reasons they felt like they could bring him in is saying exactly that, like, okay, it's a big galaxy, maybe Vader is, starting. Later on he would be, but there's this kind of Skywalker story going on, but there are all these other, the Empire is pretty big, both as a in a spatial sense, but then also like it's a big bureaucracy, right? And so you have different parts of the Empire doing different things. I mean, that's I kind of, this is slightly different, but seeing all of the Rogue One like Death Troopers and Tank Troopers and whatever else, and then reading comic books or seeing these movies that are set in the same time period, it's like, well, why didn't they, why aren't there Death Troopers here if there were Death Troopers in that same time period? And I know that's anachronistic, but I feel like, okay, well, if you're going to introduce these like super beefed up, or not beefed up, but super skilled stormtroopers in this movie, like, you need to find some way to explain like why weren't they in the other things. And I with Thrawn, it's sort of like a similar thing. It's like, all right, well, or Ezra is like, okay, well, there's the line of, there are all these lines in A New Hope that talk about how all the Jedi were hunted down and killed. So what's the story? Where are we on that?
Right.
Well, it happen, or is there a wiggle room there? Or
the one thing that the thing about Thrawn that always kind of annoyed me in retrospect was the fact that there was always issues, like he was able to figure out stuff that like just didn't seem possible. Like the idea, like
how are you going to figure that out by looking at a painting?
Yeah, I was looking at a paint. Well, Ezra enjoys cave paintings of Mandalore and blah blah blah, and it's like, but he would also say things like, "Oh, this ship was connected to this ship for 3 minutes, which is exactly the amount of time it would take for 2 people to go through an airlock." I mean, I assume because it's a cartoon, it's supposed to be fun. There'll be some of that, but it's kind of like, I'm kind of interested about because they're going to change, and there's not going to be, probably won't be any Nogri. There's obviously not going to be a Joris Sabaoth. I mean, he still has. I mean, one of the things that the way Thrawn was introduced, he basically took up the mantle because there was no opposition, and then later on they would add all these. In subsequent books, they would go, "Oh, there was all these Moffs that were fighting," and
Warlord Zinj.
Yeah, and then there was also this subplot about the idea that the Emperor was a humans first kind of guy, and that was part of the reason that Thrawn had been kind of an obscurity, because he was uncomfortable having non-humans as part of his cabinet or whatever, or of his advisors. I wonder how much of that stuff is going to kind of pop up again, or it's just going to be like he's, like they never really explain where the Inquisitors came from. I mean, anything that takes us away from the Inquisitor, that Inquisitor thing, because it's like, I just, as a fan, it just doesn't make. I mean, I like the Maul stuff. I know you're not a huge fan of the Maul stuff. I think it's actually an interesting way, since they reintroduced that character and like, no, he didn't die in 2 pieces. It's like, okay, so you're just going to have to accept that. So now what they've done with him, this idea that he's unaffiliated and that he's, he's more of a, I like that. And that's quite, but so it'll be interesting.
I think having a character like that is fine. It's just, I kind of wish that it wasn't
Maul. Yeah, I can see where you're seeing what you're saying with that, but I guess the thing with Thrawn is I guess I'm just really interested in how they're going to do it, because I don't know. I mean, was Zahn consulted, or is did he write is he writing the book on it? Is it going to be a thing where we're only going to see him for 4 episodes and then he's bested, and then people are going to be disappointed? Or is he going to, are they going to set the stage for him to be like their kind of their nemesis for the whole season?
Right.
It's kind of.
Well, and that's a good question, especially because season 2 was it was just all over the place, where so we had an episode, I keep harping on this, but like Hera gets a B-Wing, but then we never see it again. Or like this episode is about Sabine, and then this next episode's about Zeb, but then you never hear about the other Lasats anymore after that. And you know, it's a lot of times they would take up these ideas that then would never connect to the end. You know, so I think in the same interview that I think it came out today, and I don't remember where, but look for it. Dave Filoni was talking about this same issue with Thrawn, and you know that whenever they have a character, you know, they might introduce the character without thinking of this, but eventually he and Simon Kinberg and maybe Henry Gilroy, you know, they kind of work out what the end, like so where does this character end up? Like what is the end of this character's story? And that way they kind of know how to build up the rest of it and where to go with the rest of it. And so, I mean, I think the way they talked about it, it sounds like they consulted Zahn on writing Thrawn and making him kind of authentic. Much in the same way, it sounds like, you know, there's an Ahsoka novel coming out, and Filoni in the panel said that, or maybe it was in the Ahsoka. There was a Ahsoka specific panel. You know, he said that he actually read several drafts of the novel to, you know, kind of give feedback, but then also make sure that the Ahsoka in the novel was kind of authentic to the character from the show and where the character from the show would have ended up and been at the start of the novel. So I think Zahn maybe played a similar role. And then the novel he's writing, I think a separate interview with Zahn, I think maybe on StarWars.com is where this one was, has said that it's going to take place, it's going to start, it sounds like it's going to kind of make different time jumps. And the beginning of the novel is when he first gets involved in the Empire, first kind of joins the Empire, the Imperial Navy, and then sort of up to his appearance on Rebels, which, I mean, they're still kind of leaving the door open. I don't think that's a time period that had been explored in any of his previous books that included Thrawn, and so they're still not kind of overwriting the EU stuff, but they're definitely plucking one character out of the EU, and then I think eventually it's going to get to the point where, like, yeah, we're just taking this in a different direction.
Yeah, I think, and I never read the book, but I remember Zahn wrote that, you know, that was a big plot point in Heir to the Empire, was this outbound flight project.
Yeah, and then he wrote a duology.
Yeah, and I think
I didn't make it through.
I think there's a cameo from him, but I don't know how big it is.
Right. Yeah, I didn't finish the first one of those, and I didn't read the second one.
Yeah, they didn't.
I mean, he shows up in the beginning as, like, you know, this alien that the Imperials encounter, or that the Republic encounters, I guess. But
yeah, and I don't feel any grand need that they need to stick to any you know, grand respect of, like, of the timeline. I think, you know.
Yeah, no, I don't either. The only reason I was curious about that is because just so that I don't have to hear other people will complain about it, basically.
Right.
It's like, all right, are we going to have all these people, like, complaining that they're taking this EU character and then violating the EU, or are they going to be cool? And they should be cool with it for now, at least.
Yeah, I know. There's always going to be people that are like, "Oh, he would never have done that." And it's like, well, they're redoing the character.
Well, Zahn's the one writing it, so take it up with him.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of. I mean, I think it's, like I said, if they're doing like connected episodes this season instead of these kind of one-offs that kind of go nowhere, it'll be good. It'll be exciting. Although I can kind of get the feeling that some of the clips, it's like, yeah, they only have Thrawn at the end, so he might not even show up, like I said, until like the last third of the season.
Yeah.
And there's that guy who's that guy they keep, Hondo or whatever, they keep running into.
Oh, Agent Callus?
No.
Hondo, the pirate from Clone Wars.
He's my least favorite character on the show, and
he's fine. He's okay.
Yeah.
He's good in small doses, and I'm worried that they're starting to overuse him now. Again, it's like, if you're not making a sequel to the Clone Wars, why do you keep bringing this guy back?
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I'm kind of interested about how they're going to balance. I mean, I saw a clip. I didn't realize that the panel had actually gone online, and so I watched it really quick, and I got to see that clip where basically we're at this stage where they're on a ship, which Dave Filoni tells Sam Witwer, who does the voice for Maul, this is where you would have been in, if we'd done season 7 of Clone Wars, this is where Maul would have ended up. So we kept the 3D set around and we put it in and fixed it up to make it look like Rebels. And and then he's like, anyway, it's like they keep calling, Maul keeps calling, Ezra his apprentice, and it's like, and
which is interesting, and he does that in front of Kanan, and neither Ezra nor Kanan corrects him,
right? And then
like neither one of them's like, I don't think that's it.
And then in the clip we saw, Maul actually sends Kanan out a window. Basically, he's like sucking him out the thing. I mean, who knows? Who knows if that's him literally trying to kill Kanan or. Well, actually, no, because they had everybody under guns, so I think he was trying to kill him. I don't think it was a thing like, I'm going to try to send him out this airlock, but he's a Jedi. He'll be able to figure out how to not die. It's like, no, I think he's literally trying to kill Kanan. So they're still in this contentious relationship that, I kind of, it's a trope that they always do. It's I can only go back to say like Lost in Space, the idea that every week Dr. Smith was trying to come up with a way to kill the Robinson family, that kind of, he wants to take control. And I think that kind of having Maul with the Rebels crew, even in this small way, is kind of like, almost kind of like a nod to that Lost in Space idea, or subsequently in other shows when Farscape had, when they were, I think Scorpius was on their ship for a while, or Krace had ended up like they had to work with Krace. I mean, it's a great old trope from television that every time I see it, even though I know it's kind of cliched, I still like it. I'm actually kind of looking forward to that kind of it's a way of almost having a battle without having a fight. It's like it becomes ideological and they're like sniping at each other. And then, of course, it usually comes at some opportune time. The bad guy will try to mess everything up, and then it'll become resolved. But
you take these characters who have certain alliances among them, and then you kind of mix them up and see what happens.
Exactly. I mean, it's a total third season move.
Yeah.
Of a show. It's like when you had that breakout thing with the Vader battle at the end, which was, or no, I guess that was the Lothal thing considered the first episode of the second season?
Oh, I don't know. I guess
I think it is. I think so. I guess I guess I wasn't a huge fan of season 1 anyway, but season 2 started strong and then kind of got weak in the middle and then got kind of weird at the end. But
I mean, I will say, when I first saw Thrawn in the trailer for season 3, I was kind of like, oh, why did they do that? Like, I just feel like they're opening up so many things that they don't want to get themselves into. Like, do we really create a new villain? Whatever.
You think it's just too much fan service?
I was worried about that, but and then, hearing Filoni talk about it and saying that, he and Kiri Hart had been, talking for a while about what they would want to see in Rebels, or, what in Star Wars did they like and what might they want to see. And, they both wanted Thrawn on the show, and, but they had to figure out the right way to do it. Again, the things he says make me a little encouraged that, like, okay, they're not just throwing him in there for the sake of doing it. And certainly, I think Agent Callus and whoever the other Imperials they have regularly chasing the Ghost crew, like, they've proven themselves to be pretty incompetent at this point, right?
Yeah,
they're not that dangerous, and so they need to raise the stakes a little bit. But if you do that with Vader, that's like too big of a jump, and you want to use Vader sparingly. So Thrawn is kind of a nice middle ground there, I think.
Yeah, I mean, they killed off that Inquisitor. Are the Inquisitor twins gone too?
Oh, I don't know.
I forget.
I don't even remember.
They annoyed me so much. I kind of and they kind of neutered Callus with that whole Defiant Ones riff that they did thing. So it's like he comes back to his sad little apartment on the Star Destroyer, and he's kind of like, I don't have any friends, and it's like he'll probably pop up again, but him being like, somebody to be feared or worried, like, oh, Callus, I think his days of being an effective baddie are gone. So they kind of, unless they want,
he might defeat Zeb at something. Yeah, he's probably not going to.
Yeah, no, it's like,
yeah,
it's so they kind of had to come up with something new, and and why not cherry pick the EU? But once they cherry pick the EU, I mean, they've got Palion, they've got Admiral Dala, they've got, if they wanted to get into the Jedi stuff, they could Exar Kun and
right. I mean, they I guess cherry pick's a good term for it, because then they kind of open themselves up to, I guess, charges from fans that, like, oh, you're just cherry picking, you're deciding which EU characters are better than others, right? And I think that's still what I don't like about them putting Thrawn on the show. Not so much them doing it, but the fan reaction to it and the fact that people went nuts. And we've talked about this before, or I don't want to dwell on it too much, but with the EU stuff and bring back the EU, whatever, just this idea that you need like certain characters to be in the new canon to like feel your own fandom validated. Like, that's not what this is for, and that's not what it should be, right? This should be fun. It doesn't, the fact that they created this new canon, it shouldn't like invalidate the feelings you had reading these other books, right? It's fine. Like, and so seeing everyone go like, oh my God, Thrawn's back, I love Thrawn, it's like, don't use that to feel validated about, reading those books before or liking Thrawn. Just that's kind of the one thing that I'm still like, I hate seeing people feel like they need a particular character to like be canon in order to like have it matter to them or to mean something, to validate the thing it meant for them before. That's the only thing
I totally agree. It's kind of like, I mean, there is a certain kind of bankruptcy about the idea that we're, constantly going back to stuff that's pre-existing, and then as a way to kind of please a very vehement, vocal, I mean, yeah, that kind of stuff always makes you kind of remind, and I guess I should always be thinking about it. Like, at the end of the day, this is like a business, and they're trying to make the product. It's like, oh, we put we're bringing this back for a limited, we're bringing back the Crystal Pepsi because you guys wanted it so bad. But it's like, don't anybody remember how much people hated Crystal Pepsi? When everybody made fun of it. Why are we bringing it back? It's kind of, I mean, it's not really the same because people did love Thrawn, but if now I have to realize that it's like, Thrawn was 25 years ago. I'm like, oh my God, was it really that long ago? And it's like, it's as, it'll be really interesting what they do with them, because if they don't do it right, they might actually end up not getting what they wanted out of it.
Right.
In the sense that people will they'll take exception to the fact that, like, well, they changed him and he's not,
exactly.
Thing. I mean,
this isn't the Thrawn. This isn't, like you said, this isn't like an authentic.
I mean, it's even like his character design is a little different. I think he has kind of a more pronounced like ridges around his eyes, and he's, I always thought he basically, the way he was depicted in comic books, he basically was just like a human, but with blue skin and red eyes.
Right.
But now they've kind of gone to the trouble of actually making him a little bit more alien. So maybe, I understand they want people to watch their show, but yeah, it's like sometimes giving people exactly what they want is actually the surefire way of just pissing them off more.
Mm-hmm.
But, having gone from someone that like seriously was thinking like, why are we even watching this show for this podcast? There's so much we could talk about, to like going like, I'm really looking forward to this season 3. I like the new designs. I like this kind of blind swordsman thing that Kanan's got going. I like the new I like Sabine's and Ezra's new hair, and their clothes are changing, and it is kind of weird that they kind of go, hey, they've got different hair, and it's like, okay, in a jetpack, and it's like, okay,
Oh,
but,
yeah,
but
all the Mandalorian jetpacks, so it's not.
let's have some growth here. Let's have some,
Right.
I don't dislike Sabine as a character, but it's the idea where it's like, we keep getting like, oh, what is, she does graffiti, and it's like, okay, what else? Okay, she's a Mandalorian. Okay. She used to be a bounty hunter. Really? And then they don't elaborate on it.
Right. And I said this on Twitter, like I definitely think they should give her more to do, but it seems like the things they're giving her to do or the way they're developing her, the character on the show, again, it's just connecting back to the Clone Wars, right? Okay, they're tying her into the Mandalorian storyline on the Clone Wars, and they showed her with like the dark saber, which is not from the novel, not the Death Star laser, but an actual like
the pre-Vizsla's
black lightsaber from Clone Wars, and it's like, why don't you give her a different identity? Like allow Rebels and allow the characters on Rebels to have identities separate from Clone Wars.
Hey, what if?
And that's just my frustration again with like, the things that Filoni says like seem encouraging, but then the way he implements them, it's like, I know you loved working on the Clone Wars, but make this a different show.
But that's the thing. It's kind of like, with Sabine, it's like, well, okay, she's Mandalorian, and okay, so, and correct me if I'm wrong. So Jango Fett was a Mandalorian as well, right? I mean, he didn't just steal the armor.
Yeah, no.
They're of a planet, of a culture, and then there was the whole Satine thing, which was, she's more of like the Mandalorian, whatever they were, the people that wore the armor, they were considered almost a different group on the planet. They weren't part of they were the warlike thing. I
guess
they were almost like the Romulans to the Vulcans. They're kind of.
I'll have to take your word for that.
Yeah. Okay. So
Vulcans, my Star Trek knowledge doesn't extend.
Vulcans, pure logic. Romulans were more warlike, more emotional. Anyway, sorry.
I thought that was
sorry. I'm getting your Star Trek. I'm getting your Star Trek stuck in your Star Wars. I apologize to listeners, but my point is like, why couldn't they make Sabine kind of an asshole sometimes? It would be interesting because it's like, there's a lot of like this thing like, oh, Ezra and oh God, who's the big guy's name? I forget it. Zeb. They keep they have like little things like, oh, you spilled my coffee or something. Like, what if she was like, coming and going and like doing bounties and it kind of, or she kind of had her own thing and she would come back and she'd be in conflict because it's like Boba Fett, and Boba Fett was kind of a jerk, and Pre-Vizsla was if you watch the Clone Wars, he was a jerk, and I
guess Zeb is the one they have who's like kind of a jerk sometimes.
But in a
very non-threatening way.
But in non-threatening, and his loyalty is right then and there, and it's like if they could like, maybe her like, I have my own agenda, and sometimes that's not going to line up with and then she's still part of the crew. I think that would give her like a really interesting kind of thing. And then it's like, she came from a warlike, a very, a belligerent tradition. And
they have some characters like that in both, the Battlefront novel and in the Aftermath novels, so they have room for characters like that who, maybe they're helping the rebels now, but only because it suits whatever they need at the time, and then they kind of go off and do their own thing.
I hate to pick nits. It's just the thing that's like, giving someone a new hairstyle isn't enough. Giving someone a new sword isn't enough.
Yeah.
I apologize if I sound like I'm prejudging something I haven't even seen yet. And I'm not, because I'm totally open to whatever they're throwing down, and then we'll revisit these. Maybe if I even remember I said this. It's just the idea that like they could do so much. In so many respects, it becomes. I get the feeling that the crew is like the Get Along Gang, and it's just like once everybody made their I think Hera and and Kanan are gonna. I think they're gonna probably have more of a romantic relationship, maybe, just because of like how the way things kind of ended in season 2. I mean, and that's cool, but it's just like let's give them something to do. Let's give them something to do where you're just like, wow, that's a really different type of Star Wars story we're taking, instead of like, hey, but the purview of the show is for kids, and maybe they're like Disney says like we don't want to try to, we can't sell toys if you make Sabine a bad guy, not necessarily a bad guy, but maybe a mercenary type thing. It's like, I don't know. It's I like the character. I just want more excuses to like her, because I'm not as jazzed about like things like hair. Right. And I'm not trying to say that I'm better than, because I mean, there's different ways you can enjoy things. It doesn't always have to be violence. But I feel like
it's like, okay, if you gave her a new hair color, like, are you going to give her more to do on the show, or are you just going to be like, look, she changed her hair color?
Yeah, it's it feels superficial in the sense that like it doesn't really, on first blush, it doesn't really mean anything. Now, if this is tied into this idea that she's become, she has this thing where this is her identity now, and she's more Mandalorian. That's why she gets her jetpack, and then she has her perspective of like this newfound pride in her because there was some rumor going on that she might be related to somebody of Mandalorian descent that's going to come up.
Yeah, and I didn't.
It might have been Tia Sakar had said that at the panel.
Yeah, and since I didn't really watch the Clone Wars much, I didn't know who she was talking about, and so
yeah, I mean, there's the Pre-Vizsla character who's gone and who possessed the Darksaber, which I assume that if she has the Darksaber, that might mean that. I think Maul had that.
Yeah,
so, I don't know. It's that thing where it's like maybe she's related to that, or maybe she's related to Fett at the Fets at some point. But I mean, I'm just obviously just speculating. But like I said, I think they can do a little bit more than hey, I got a jetpack, a lightsaber, and a new haircut.
Yeah,
but that's, I mean, even Dave Filoni was like saying like everybody was complaining about Ezra's hair, then I change it, and then they go, what happened to his hair? It's like, you can't please everyone. So I will, I will say that,
right. Yeah.
I'm just,
I mean, and when they changed her hair for season 2, they kind of tied into like, well, she encountered Vader, and that, that really, it made her sad inside, and so that's why her hair is blue now. And so maybe they're giving this new hair color, like you said, kind of a similar kind of basis in her character or the story or something.
I will hopefully that maybe they will be able to, because she's an artist, and we know that Thrawn is, well, at least the classic Thrawn is an art guy. He thinks that the kind of art you consume tells you a lot about you as a person, which you could make a good argument
connection.
And I think, hey, that'll be cool. Maybe maybe her tags will be really telling to something, and in the sense where she has to go like, I got to stop tagging stuff because I'm leading them right to us, which I always kind of thought was a thing on the show anyway. Why is she tagging stuff all the time with rebel symbols? All you're going to do is let the Empire know that there's a rebel sympathizer on the planet, but whatever.
So I guess I kind of want to wrap up just because we're running long, but there is one other thing I wanted to talk to you about.
Okay.
And you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but immediately following Star Wars Celebration, some people on Twitter were saying that they were disappointed with the Rogue One panel, and then that future of storytelling panel that had Alden Ehrenreich and John Boyega was there, and so they talked a little bit about Episode 8, but they're saying, like you said, we didn't get a new trailer for Rogue One. Some people were disappointed that we didn't find out the title of Episode 8. Some people were disappointed that we didn't learn any, about who else would be in the cast for the Han Solo movie. I mean, how did you feel about not getting that information? I mean, do you feel like
Well,
do you feel like we should have gotten that information, or do you feel like, it's fine, it doesn't matter?
I at the end, it's fine. It doesn't matter. I had said, like, I made a prediction that they were going to drop an episode 8 title, but then I realized they have so much kind of, and they're going to have to put a little bit more energy pushing this Rogue One forward that I don't think they wanted to obscure it for a second. I think they were very respectful of putting Rogue One on the first and center stage. They don't want to undercut. You don't want to undercut your own thing, because like they're going to have in Florida, it's going to be in 17, it's going to be crazy. It, because people are so excited coming off of, because regardless of whether or not episode 8 turns out to be fantastic or not, because there's really no way to tell. Everybody in their mind thinks, well, Star Wars was great, and in a lot of ways Empire was even better, and they think them
right.
Oh, they're going to do that again, which we all know that there's no foregone conclusion that you can just do that. I honestly just getting a few minutes to kind of actually put my eyes on Alden Ehrenreich and see what he looks like and how he kind of carries himself. To me, that's all at this point. That's all I can take of that, because the Phil Lord and Chris Miller, they said they literally just moved to England. I mean, they are. This movie is pretty far away, and there is going to be plenty of time. Yeah. Think about this. I mean, if you're a person who's like mad about this, I mean, we're long-winded people, but we only scratched the surface of all these panels we're talking about. There is so much information. Why put it all up front? Why go, oh, this is, why bring Alden Ehrenreich out in costume or with the haircut and completely undercut the, Dave Filoni's thing that he's wants people to be excited about. And of course, in episode, that's, there's 4 major productions, it's almost like saying, like, why didn't they bring out Colin Trevorrow and him show you some production things? It's like, well, all in good time. This is a long con. It's we're going out. It's 2016.
Taking a long view of these.
Taking the long view of it. Like, this is going to last until 2020, 2021. I mean, I don't want to do all the math, but I mean, there's going to be a lot of time. There's going to be plenty of information. They probably want to see how Rogue One does, and they probably want to see how Episode 8 goes. And if they have to make adjustments, like, oh, we tried this thing and people hated it. Well, we better take the 20 minutes of it that we have out of the Han Solo movie, because we know that's not going to work. So they're not going to want to show their cards. I mean, Celebration is, they call it Celebration. They don't really call it a convention. It's a celebration of Star Wars. You go there to be around other nerds and to wait in line and to do this thing like, oh, so-and-so brought me pizza. And then fun stuff happens, like, John Boyega comes out and, hugs Alden Ehrenreich. I mean, I say Alden Ehrenreich looked really nervous, I would say. And I'll be interested what, the Lord and Miller, those two guys, I honestly had no experience. I don't know anything about them. Never saw a picture of them before that day. And it's kind of like, I think they probably weren't very comfortable even talking about what they were talking about, but they seem to have kind of fun. But I think they both knew, it's like, we can't really tell you anything about this. I mean, did they say they were still working on the script, or?
I imagine they would, right? Because that movie's not coming out for 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, they're still tweaking. They're still tweaking it.
They're still in pre-production. I mean, and that's the thing. That was my reaction too. I mean, first, for the episode, I guess I would say, I was surprised that we didn't get a Rogue One trailer.
Yes,
but beyond that, the title for, we're still like you said, we're still 5 months away from Rogue One. And then, which means we're like a year and a half away from Episode 8 still, right? They just wrapped filming, and then they have post-production, they have reshoots to do. So to expect them to have a title for that, like, especially now that they do the crawl digitally, they could change the title up until like the very last minute if they need to.
Right.
And I think for The Force Awakens, I don't think we learned the title this early.
I think we did. I think by this time we knew Force Awakens, because I think they had done the sizzle reel, right? I think we found it when the first teaser, wasn't it?
That could be.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. I get your point.
But yeah, regardless. But yeah, I mean, it's just the title of the movie. The title of the movie is like the least important part of it. Like,
I mean, that's
good. And I feel like this is maybe just this is a complaint that only comes up in this like Disney era. Like, imagine if George Lucas was still making these films. Like, imagine someone telling him like, oh, by the way, the fans want a title for the movie, so you have to come up with a title for the movie at least 6 months before it comes out, and you won't be able to change it once you do. Like, no, that wasn't what he did at all. Like, he wanted to tinker with everything.
Yeah, I mean,
people were okay with it.
He tried that once, and then he had to change the damn title.
Yeah,
because he realized at the last minute, like, oh, that's a mistake. I shouldn't have said that. So he learned his lesson in 1982.
Right.
I mean, I'm sorry, Star Wars learned its lesson in 1982 about the fact that you don't lock yourself in so early.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing as you were alluding to, and as we talked about at the beginning of the show, right? This is advertising. They have product that they want to get out there, that they want to make people aware of, so that they can purchase it. Rogue One is the next one up, and they want to make sure that people are paying attention to Rogue One. They want to make sure that news organizations are reporting about Rogue One, and they're like, oh, there's new footage of Rogue One, because that way it starts reminding the more general public that, oh, there's a new Star Wars movie coming out this year. And if they start cluttering that up with like, well, here's more of the cast of the Han Solo movie, and here's the title of Episode 8, and here's some footage from Episode 8, and it's just gonna muddle their message, and it's going to detract from Rogue One. And they want to make sure that they give that enough attention, not just because they want to like treat their movies equally and treat Gareth Edwards well, but because they want to make sure that they make as much money as they can, and they want to devise a marketing strategy that reflects that.
Right. I mean, if I could, my point is that nerds, I'm speaking to you. You've never had it so good. Don't complain. It's amazing how much information they threw at you, even if it wasn't all useful to your ends. I mean, I have that. Once again, I'm going to dip into the old days. It's like, when I was a kid, 1982, you'd pick up a Starlog magazine, and there would be something. I'm like literally the size of my thumb in the letters page of Starlog magazine of the matte painting of the shuttle base on Endor. And from 1980, and one shot of Luke Skywalker in an elevator, that's all I saw for 3 years. I couldn't, there's no podcasts, there's no magazines, no mobile, there's really crappy Atari games. There's no toys that were, they would maybe have one extra toy, and it was General Madine. Ugh. It's like before you get all worked up about what you're not getting, just think about what you are getting and enjoy that. It's like it'll all be an all good time. You trust me.
Don't be so needy.
Haste makes waste, guys. Haste makes waste. And the
one thing I will say it's kind of interesting, and I don't know that this was intentional, but it's sort of working out that way. I assume that they alternate for Celebration. They alternate either being in the U.S. or being in Europe. I'm assuming.
They've done some other ones in other. I think they did one in Japan,
or at least one in the U.S. and one not in the U.S.
Right.
I'll say right. So because next year's I think is in Orlando, right? So at least the way it is right now, it's sort of on track that for the years that they're in the US, they'll be promoting these, saga movies, the one with episode numbers and opening crawls and everything. And then the ones where they're not in the US are when they're promoting the standalone stories. And so I don't know to what extent that might also influence like how they're marketing these things, or whether they're related, or whether that's a coincidence. But I mean, it's something else to keep in mind too.
Yeah.
That when we talk about how they're rolling out all this information, I mean, there were some of these panels were put, I'm sure, at a time so that people in the US could also watch them on YouTube, but like there's still a time delay for when this news gets released and when like people who work at news organizations in the US are awake to publish it and to promote it. And so, you know, I think that also needs to be taken into account when they schedule these things outside the US and when they start rolling out the marketing and the promotions for these different films, is that, the standalone Star Wars movies just might get treated differently.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's like I said, I'd always made an assumption, which I don't know if the assumption was even realistic, is that maybe they did these movies a little cheaper than the saga films.
Yeah, I don't know.
But, you know.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's a pretty good place to wrap it up.
Yeah, that does beg the one question, though.
Which is?
Are we going to Celebration 17 as a show? No.
Probably not.
Probably not. I know. But stranger things have happened. And one of the ways, if you guys are thinking, like, I want Robert and John in Florida, probably the only way you could influence that is if you used our Amazon link and got us so much revenue that we could afford to go.
Yeah.
And then I'd have to probably spend 6 months convincing John to go to Disney World. But that link is at talkingbirdcast/Amazon. And it's just a great way to help this goofy show that we do, that we love doing so much. What happens is you just go through that when you buy your normal stuff on Amazon, and it just kicks a little back to us. The Amazon pays for it. You don't have to pay for it. I know you guys have been doing it. Because I check it, and I do. If you've done it already, I appreciate it. If you're thinking of doing it, please do so. If you're thinking of doing it again, go ahead, because we appreciate it, and it's literally just a great way to help us kind of offset hosting costs for everything. And then, like I said, if you want to, basically all of our social media stuff that's active right now is at talkingbirdcast.com, and you can, we don't really have anything up there brand new, except John did screen cap some photos of some of the specific stuff. You could go there. Hey, drop us a line, hosts at talkingbirdcast.com. Let us know what you're feeling about this thing. If there's something like, hey, I like it when you guys do this. I don't know if I want to hear if I want to hear your complaints, but if you got those two, then I guess I'm a grown up. I can accept that. But my point is that I'd love to hear from what people are feeling about what they saw at Celebration, and we'll talk about. We can talk about it on the show. We might actually revisit some of these topics that we didn't get to this week. We've gone kind of long, so I'm going to say my goodbyes and thank you for listening from Talking Birdcast. I have been Robert Zachary.
I remain John Llewellyn.
Thanks for listening, and may the Force be with you.